Today I'm introducing Bob Honig, the author of Aftermath Boy. And I really thought it was important to introduce people to this book and to this author because we're in desperate need of new ways of thinking about the situations that we're finding ourselves in. Um, the last year has been and continues to be a time of unbelievable conflict and fear, and especially in the Jewish community, especially in relation to Israel and the plight of the Palestinians. And this book does an amazing job of unpacking the connection between the never again conclusion uh, of the Holocaust and the actual world that we live in, and in which the plight of the Palestinians is absolutely upfront in the news. And our protagonist in the story really struggles with an empathy for the Palestinian struggle, uh, and uh, and his own thinking about the Jewish state while dealing with his family and dealing with their resentment about the Holocaust, their conception of never again. And so this is really, I think, a beautiful step into kind of trying to find some new thinking about these issues. So welcome.
Thank you.
So in Aftermath Boy, we have a son of Holocaust survivors, and he lives a life that the suburban life that nevertheless has to deal with anti-Semitism, makes some not so great decisions, ends up accused of interfering with the 2024 presidential elections. So what inspired you to set up a story like this? What was the setup for it?
Well, being the son of Holocaust survivors, this has been an issue in my life that has really challenged me to wrap my head around what exactly happened and what did it mean. And I was able to push that aside for many years until I finally had the courage to go to the Holocaust Museum myself, sit down and review the testimonies to the Shoah Foundation of my two surviving aunts. And that just inspired me to take notes. And then I started to write spontaneously. I didn't expect to write a novel. In fact, I had made many false attempts to write a novel over the years. That, writing a novel is like having a relationship. You have to be dedicated to it. You have to put the time in. You have to care about it day by day. And this was a 4-year process. So this was a long relationship for me. And it enabled me to not only come closer to understanding my own mother, which had always been a challenge because we were at odds all during my childhood and life, but to understand why a family can be turned against itself because the waves of history catch them up in unexpected ways. So this was a huge epiphany for me, just this process of writing. And as I wrote, the story began to change because I was able to confront some of the major questions that I faced in life, which we all face, which has to do with how do we deal with our own humanity? Can we put our humanity ahead of our tribe? And this is a central conflict in the book, because the first generation of Holocaust survivors and the family members had to face oppression both from Nazis, from the Arrow Cross in Hungary, from fascists across the board, but also from the Red Army, from Soviet Russia. People were picked up and transported for labor after the war and during the war by the Russian military. And this formed a resentment in the Holocaust survivor element of my family that was at odds with my own vision of what it meant to be human and to take care of anybody who's under attack. So that also led to the central question that I think we all face. On the one hand, we all have a right to self-defense and must defend ourselves if we're threatened, particularly in terms of being threatened of life and limb. But on the other hand, to what extent does that right come in conflict with someone else's right to self-defense? And I began to understand in the end that if we want to be treated well, we have to treat others well. I mean, that sounds overly simplistic, but in the end, when you wade through all the complexities of history and all the conflicts, whether it's Palestinian versus Jew, whether it's Northern Ireland versus the Brits, whatever, South Africa and apartheid, whatever it is, in the final analysis, you have to find a stasis where you put humanity first. And that trumps your tribe, no pun intended.
There's no way avoiding that pun. It
No.
just no way, just doesn't happen. So this novel begins from a very difficult and personal place. It's at least to some extent autobiographical and biographical, right? Your family. So when you're developing these characters, right? Clearly you have sort of you're working out your kind of vision of the world in this novel. So how kind of emotional and moral guidelines did you kind of set for yourself in developing the characters?
Well, it was an incredible challenge because I did not want to hurt anyone, past or present. So if you want to do no harm in that sense, what you have to do is understand that you're dealing in fiction. This is not a novel that's a memoir. The characters have to assume the burden of the message that you want to send, but they also have to remain real. So on the one hand, you draw from what you know and your actual experience interacting. And on the other hand, you can take that and add to it. And I had to add to it because I had to research any number of things. The Holocaust testimonies that I reviewed were very profound, but they often conflicted. There were huge gaps. When I sat down to write about Dachau and Bergen-Belsen, I had to be able to visualize them. I had to be able to understand viscerally what that experience amounted to. I had to add in historical characters that actually, like Wallenberg, that played a role in preserving the Hungarian Jewry, and also incidentally happened to play a role in my own survival. Because if my mother and her younger sister hadn't survived, I wouldn't be here.
So I'm trying to imagine the process of kind of wading around in all of that family stuff. That has got to be unbelievably difficult in terms of but so was it refreshing to you at some level to be able now to see your family and to understand better who they are and why they were who they are?
Absolutely. I mean, my family was extremely offended by my behavior. And my behavior, and this is part of why the book, I think, is worth the time I put into it and the message it has. Because we don't understand how we really affect others because we have a certain, especially a young man, has a certain moral certitude. And as you discover things and you learn things when you're younger, you want to present them, you want to defend them. And so this whole history that the survivor generation had really hadn't sunk in with me because I was too immature to appreciate the validity that they were presenting to me, which was in direct conflict. And as I began to write the book and understand how these two different elements clashed so bitterly, so profoundly, I began to realize how difficult it is to unravel that unless you confront it and look to your own humanity for some kind of resolution. So for a while, I guess I was feeling shame
Mhm.
at the way I had responded. But as I wrote, and I went through 4 years, I'd say at least more than 40 rewrites. The book changed profoundly, and it was also changing because of current history and current events, particularly the advent of events from the start of Trump coming down the escalator that, as I researched, I learned what I'm seeing now is what happened in Europe in the 20s and 30s. These steps of taking over the judiciary, of ridiculing the rule of law, of using propaganda as Goebbels did to shape an entire population's view, and how that became viral. Even before there was the internet, it did become viral. And people were glued to the radio and glued to the same message. As Goebbels said, if you repeat the same thing over and over and over and over again, and that's what people hear, it begins to sink in. So I began to see these parallels, and I realized I had to alter the story profoundly. And that's when I added the element of what happens in the protagonist, Billy's older incarnation, which is in every facet of the book. You read about what's happened in the present and how this person, who ironically discovers as a member of the Senate staffing that the US government was so complicit in the murder of the Jews that there was a paper that was presented to Morgenthau, who was in FDR's cabinet, called The Acquiescence of the Murder of the Jews by the United States government.
Wow.
So here I am, a staff member, reading this, and that had a profound effect on what happens to my protagonist, because it is the government coming after the protagonist for political reasons and employing artificial intelligence to try to make a false case that he's been involved in the death of a state senator's wife and involved in some plot to take key votes away from this Wisconsin county that make all the difference because the election hangs on those final electoral votes.
We can hear a little echo of the news in the story. So one of the things that impressed me about the book and about you is that you're not afraid to really deal with moral themes, to deal with what are real and pressing issues. So what kind of insights do you think this book has on kind of the things that we're seeing today and the world that we're living in right now?
Well, I don't pretend to have the moral high ground. And one thing you realize when you go through this type of process is how limited you are in your own worldview, and how there's a certain humility that goes hand in hand with caring for humanity. A certain process of saying, you know, I'm unique as a human being, but I'm not unique in history. I have my place, but I have to understand how much I can contribute and what I can really do. So in this book, the message I'm trying to convey is something that James Baldwin said, which I really take to heart. And this really motivated me when I first read it in many ways. And he said, people are trapped in history, and history is trapped in them.
Mm, mm,
And understanding what that means and how you get caught up in thinking that you have the right idea and that you can impose it. And this had to do with my protagonist's view of religion in general. It's a great mystery that no one has the right to impose on anyone else. And to me, that's part of being human, is to realize that while, of course, the Almighty is a possibility that you can embrace, you can also embrace your fellow human being. And if there is a greater power, that's how you reach that greater power, through your fellow human beings. And so when you look at the tremendous carnage in Palestine, which hurts my heart, as you know, I was raised as a Jew, and I have said often that I would defend Israel to my last drop of blood, but not at the expense of an entire group of people. There is no license that we have to presume that we can bomb and take the lives of innocent civilians and retain the moral high ground. I mean, there's good and there's evil, and it hurts my heart that the current government in Israel cannot seem to distinguish between good and evil. That said, you know, what I tried to put in this book, I hope is universal. I hope, you know, it's not my attempt to preach, it's my attempt to lay out the experiences of this particular family and how their experiences were swept up in the history of their moment, the horror that they lived through, and how that translated into another generation that, while we experienced anti-Semitism, we had so many benefits. And because of the civil rights movement we lived through, because of the feminist movement that we lived through, we had advantages that our parents never had. And sometimes we took advantage of those and sometimes we didn't. But this was part of our experience. And while not trying to, as I say, spell out right and wrong, which is always a slippery slope, what I try to give the reader is a handle on maybe grappling with some of these issues in their own lives.
right. One of the things I appreciate, you know, listen, there's nobody in the world who can offer all the answers. Now, there are a lot of guys who look like me, right, with, you know, with yarmulkes and beards, who would love to be able to say that they can offer all the answers, and maybe kind of religion has often been in that business, but ultimately, what religion should be doing is asking the big questions. And if religion is not making us more human, you know, if religion is not making us more human, you know, then, you know, I got, you know, I gave a speech when I was in Hebrew school, on the Palestinians, and I got an award for it, and I got kicked out of Hebrew school. So at exactly the same time, uh, it's it understanding how to live the values of humanity, how to kind of process the lessons of history. As you say, the history lives within us and we live within history. That's absolutely true. And understanding how we're supposed to understand those things is really uh is is really challenging. But what I like about what I like about what you've tried to do here is that you haven't run away from the struggle. Is that instead of giving in to giving into the sound bites and giving into the sound bites and giving into the bumper stickers, instead you've tried to kind of look deeper into into the dynamics of what it means to be a human being living in history and having history living in them. And I think that's very impressive.
And in this day and age when we are so divided as a country, when, you've got MAGA versus everybody else on the left
Right.
who can be demonized. And we demonize the MAGA in return. And what's the upshot of that? Maybe we win the next election if, that comes to pass as we hope, as we desperately hope, because democracy's on the line. But we still have this burden of having to reconnect as a people, of having to understand each other, not from the standpoint of the positions they take, but who they are as people. And as you know, I spent a long time in the Bible Belt of all places, working to build community. And community is the solution. And we can only build community if we listen and we talk, we break bread, we spend time, we invest in each other. It's a long, hard road. And it's a road we can only take if we have the humility to understand that our answers are not absolute. Our answers are the best we can do. And that's what I have in this book. It's not a protagonist who comes to the right conclusions, because there are no right conclusions. There's only relationships that we can build with each other that help us discover more about ourselves and our place in the universe.
And with that, I'm going to tell you to read the book. Really, this is an opportunity. We have opportunities really to explore what it means to be a human being, and what it means to build relationships in our families and in our communities. And thank you so much, everybody, for listening. And I hope that you'll share your comments, and we'll put a link to the book in the comments below. Thank you so much.
Thank you.